For many of you, at last the day has finally come. We've been in chapter 2 of Daniel, which is all about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and have successfully avoided talking about it at all. But today, that changes. So join me in Daniel chapter 2. So up to this point in Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has had a dream that has greatly disturbed him. And he has called together his wise men and he asked them to show him the dream and the interpretation. And they told him, well, that's crazy. No one has ever asked for that. And he said, that's not good enough. I sentence you all to death. And so Arioch, the king's man, goes to begin the sentence, killing all of the wise men, and he goes to Daniel. And when he gets to Daniel, Daniel says, whoa. Killing? Why are we killing? And Arioch explains the situation, and Daniel convinces him to give him enough time to pray about the situation. Daniel prays a beautiful, powerful prayer after God reveals the king's vision to him. And that is the moment we're going to pick up at. What happens after Daniel thanks God? So this is verse 24 of Daniel chapter 2. Therefore, Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. Whoa. Now, before we can get to the dream, we have to understand this part, because this part actually sets up how we can begin to understand the dream at a deeper level. Now, I want to point out 3 key things that have happened up to this point, okay? The king has been, and so I had to deeply resist bringing a whiteboard with me on stage today. So I'm going to ask you to use a little bit of imagination, and I'm going to try and be real vivid with my description, because the better you can see it, the more powerful it becomes. Trust me. So on our timeline, we start with the king who is at a loss. He doesn't have the things he needs. He's confused. And so he goes to the wise men. The wise men don't have what he needs. They say it is impossible, and therefore he sentences them to death. Then he sends Arioch, okay, as we talked about a long time ago, the name that means lion man. He sends Arioch to kill and to destroy the frauds, the wise men of Babylon, okay? 1, 2, 3, sequence of events. Insert right in the middle, Daniel, okay? When we come to Daniel, we see a profound shift. The whole trajectory of this story was from confusion and anger and power hurtling towards destruction. But then we come up against Daniel. And who is this man? This is a man of humility. When he comes against a mystery that he cannot understand, he does not claim it is impossible. He does not bring up from his own wisdom ways to understand it. He says, allow me to seek God. Right. And so Daniel, with his friends, he gathers those around him. He lifts up a prayer to God. And God reveals to him the vision. that brings us to this point. The trajectory was destruction until Daniel, a man of prayer and humility, gathers his friends and lifts up prayers to God. Then Arioch hears Daniel, and now he's not going to Daniel, he's going from Daniel to the king. You see, the king sent him to destroy Daniel, and he was going towards him. But now the direction has been reversed as we come on the other side of Daniel. Now he's going from Daniel, the man of prayer and humility, the man of God, to the king. And when Arioch, the lion man, is sent to the king, the wise men are saved. Because Daniel, the leader of the wise men, has now come with an answer for the king. And where before the king was at a loss, he was confused, he had no alternatives, now he has received. This, the first half, was the arc of destruction. But it reaches Daniel and it becomes a story of redemption. Every piece of the story is undone by the power of humility and of prayer. Now, this isn't just something I made up. You see, this is a common construction that we see throughout the Bible and throughout the literature and theology of Christians. You see, this is a structure called a chiasm. What that means is that one side of the structure is mirrored in reverse on the other side. The point is that it draws you in towards the middle. You see, on either side of the timeline, we have the king who was at a loss, and then the king who had everything he needed. We have the wise men who were bound for destruction, and now the wise men will receive life. We have Arioch the lion man who was going to kill the man of God, and then we have Arioch the lion man who was sent from the man of God. And who is at the middle? Daniel. And what does Daniel do? He prays. Do we see the structure? A chiasm became an important structure because it symbolizes the cross. It is the cross. In fact, Christos is the name of Jesus Christ in Greek. The chi is the first letter. It's an X. It's a chiasm. It's an inverse. Because the arc of destruction, when brought before God, is redeemed completely and totally. No piece of the story was left untouched by the redemption that God offered through Daniel. And that's something else we have to remember. God offered the redemption of the whole story through the humility of the man. Daniel is pointing us towards what Christ will accomplish when he comes. But that just means he's pointing towards what we will be, what we are today. You see, what comes of all of this, and I know I'm skipping the dream again, but we're going to get to the dream, I promise. At the end, right, he says, King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel. I'm sorry, this is it. Verse 46, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. But God didn't reveal it directly to Nebuchadnezzar, did he? He used Daniel. You see, God has chosen, and he has shown us in Jesus Christ, the God who became man, that he wants to reveal his redemption to the world through his people, through the faithful, through those who are willing to humble themselves before him in prayer and ask for the things they need in which to redeem the story of the world. King Nebuchadnezzar is just a symbol, is a type. He is a historical figure. I'm not saying that he's not. But he points to people who you can think of in your life. People who are desiring control and have no way to find it, and they lash out, and their story is hurtling towards destruction, and it's coming towards you, and it's going to hurt you and your relationship, and things are going to break apart, and you are at the center. You are the possible turning point that God can use if you will humble yourself in prayer to totally redeem that situation. Not just part of it, all of it. An entire nation is transformed because Daniel was willing to humble himself in prayer. This is the structure in the story. And I want you to remember that symbol. I'm talking really fast because you're getting 2 sermons for the price of 1 today, okay? Because now we're getting into the dream. So let's read together. This is verse 31. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hands he has given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so will they mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation true. Imagine being in that throne room and not reading this, but hearing it from the voice of Daniel. What power it has today. What power it must have had then. And there's all manner of routes you can take through this dream, and I mean all manner. Right? And one of the primary is just the historical route. You're tracking. Daniel has often been called the book of empires in the Bible, right? And it's for this reason. That you can track through history the empires that he's talking about, that he's prophesying about, and how they came to pass. And it's amazing how God weaves together that story through history to accomplish this prophecy. And we could get into the finer details of who they think the Bronze Kingdom is and why sometimes people think Rome is the last kingdom and why sometimes people think Greece is the last kingdom. But we're not going to do any of that. Instead, we're going to do the same thing we did with the first. We're going to try and understand the structure of what God is revealing. And it tells a powerful story. So let's consider an image. What do we mean by image? Well, image clearly refers to a statue, right? It had a head, chest, arms, thighs, etc. It refers to a statue. An image refers to an idol. right? This is an image of a man made by man. Man is being glorified. He's being exalted, right, to the point of even being frightening. A man who frightens a king. But this is the same kind of image which the pagans worshipped, which Israel in their sinfulness worshipped. This is an image which represents all that is prideful, all that is temporary, all that is built up by our own hands and therefore finite. It will come to an end. And in fact, part of that story is coming to an end, but let's consider how it comes to an end. You see, what is the statue made of? There weren't individual statues, it was one statue. This is one united history, and it was made of precious metals. Well, what do precious metals symbolize? They symbolize things like money. They symbolize things like power. And in fact, you can see the transition in the statue. The first two heads are gold and silver. This is prosperity. This is economic might. But as you go down, you find less valuable metals coming in. Metals that don't worry so much about money, and they worry about the ability to take by force what they desire. You see, the trajectory of the human kingdom is to start by looking beautiful. And slowly but surely, the history of man plays out the fall of man. As the gold transitions into silver, the gold is no more. No longer is the statue gold. It's now silver. There has come to an end the kingdom of gold, and so too the silver ends, and so too the bronze ends, and so too the iron ends, and finally the iron and the clay. Man, even in this vision, is finite. His empire, his power, his history is finite. You see, and there's a trick to this, right? Because at first, you start with this beautiful head of gold, and as you go down, you find that the kingdoms are expanding, right? So you go from this finite point, this beginning, and they're expanding outward, and you think, wow, conquering the whole earth? That's incredible. Except as the statue continues on, you find that those kingdoms start to break, that the iron shatters and eventually mixes with the clay, and so itself becomes the weakness that it sowed in the world, and therefore it comes once again to an end. An end ultimately determined by the rock not made of human hands. So do you see the trajectory? You start at this beginning point, this beautiful head of gold, and it seems to maximize, to get so much better, but ultimately the path of man is destruction. And it comes once again to an end. This is the story of our lives if we idolize ourselves, if we idolize our own power and control, or the power of any kingdom. This is the history of the empires of the world, and they will rise and they will fall. Closed loop. Right? The focus is at the beginning. Wow, how great is that? But ultimately, it ends. But its ending, though inevitable, is brought about by the rock, which was not cut by human hands. Right? It's not totally clear how that was known, but apparently it was completely and totally obvious. And let's think about the difference between a rock and the precious metals. How valuable is a rock? Let's go outside and try to barter with these rocks, right? But you're not going to get very far because rocks are not valuable. But rocks are not made by men. You see, the rock and the mountain have deep symbolism. You see, the image was made by man, but the rock and the mountains are not. They're things without value, right? The rock doesn't have any value, and yet it destroys all those things which we value. It's interesting. And the rock is sent, right, at the right time. It's sent at the end of the kingdoms, right? When they don't have the kind of power that they once have, when they've been found completely in their weakness and only believe themselves to be strong. And we know in the Bible that rocks get used all the time to mean a lot of really beautiful things. In 2 Peter, we're told we are living stones. In the Old Testament, rocks were used to build altars. When we look around at the world, it is not the things of gold and silver and bronze that have endured, but the buildings that were properly constructed of stone, with an end in mind of something that would last beyond the lifetime of the builder. And that's just human stone. Much less imagining what a rock not cut by human hands would last. And you know what that maybe reminds us of? You see, rocks are common. They're of the earth. And yet it had the power to destroy empires? Is that maybe a stumbling block? Is that maybe the cornerstone the builders rejected? Where did that rock land? At the feet, at the base, at the foundation. And it destroyed what was there because what was there had not been built upon it. And you see, there's this hint that begins to form that the kind of kingdom that's being talked about in this rock to mountain process is no longer the same kind of kingdom as the ones that came before, right? We see that first in the value of the rock versus the precious metals. But then we see it in the value, or in the symbolism of the rock and the precious metals, right? It's no longer an image of man. Now it's something that's made by God. And it transitions from a stone into a mountain. Well, that's strange. You see, stones don't have much value, though they have the possible to build things that have value. But mountains, well, I would argue that now we've gone from something which we set value upon to something which is invaluable. What price can you set upon a mountain? Upon its beauty, upon its grandeur, upon its endurance through the world. Long after all of us are dead, the mountains of the earth will stand. This is a different kind of kingdom that is being talked about. And what is the symbolism of a mountain in the history of the Bible? Well, there's the Mount of Olives. There's Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai. There's the Sermon on the Mount. You see, there's the mountain where Abraham begins to sacrifice Isaac. Mountains in the Bible are the place where God speaks. It's the place where he chooses to meet his people. In fact, right, the Temple Mount. The Jews built the temple on a mountain. Why? Because God had spent the last several centuries meeting them on mountains. Mountains are in the Old Testament for Abraham, Moses, Elijah. They're places of hearing God's voice and being close in his presence. And you see, this is pretty incredible because do rocks grow? What a strange thing. Didn't you notice that the rock becomes a mountain and ultimately fills the entire earth? How strange. Rocks don't grow. Mountains don't expand. In fact, they shrink. So what are we talking about? The rock not cut by human hands begins a change in the story. The kingdoms of the world are declining, and they are ultimately destroyed. But not in the way that we first imagined, that the Jews for many centuries first imagined, that it would be some sort of kingdom of the world, right, that would rise up and destroy the other kingdoms. No, this is a different kind of kingdom. This is a kingdom with a different kind of value. It's not the value of the image of man. It's not the value of the precious metals. It's the value of what has been established by God. And that mountain, that stone will become the mountain that fills the whole earth. You see, Jesus had an interesting interaction that relates very closely to this with the woman at the well. You see, she was saying, well, you worship in Jerusalem and we worship on the mountain of Jacob. And Jesus tells her, woman, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father and the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the Spirit and the truth. Even in Daniel, we are getting a vision of a spiritual reality of the kingdom. God never had any intention to come as a knight on a white horse, as a conquering epic hero. He came to turn the values of the world upside down by striking at their root, at their foundation. Because as we talked about, the trajectory of the kingdoms of the world looks great, but ultimately falls. But then what does the rock do? It destroys what's there, but ultimately it grows and it fills the whole earth. And there's nothing in there that says it will cease expanding. It will grow unto eternity. So what shape does that make? In the very structure of this dream is Jesus. In the very structure of this dream is the cross, is the story of redemption. God is truly the master storyteller. Amen. He takes all the history of the empires of the world and he brings it to a point in Jesus Christ on which all history turns. And then he fills the world with a mountain, the place where God speaks. Through Jesus, the kingdom of God is made available, and all of its hope of expansion, all of its purpose, all of its never-ending glory. And it does so by turning everything we value upside down. It's no longer about the money or the power or the authority or the influence or the control. It's about the rock on which it is built. If you build your life on Jesus Christ, the mountain will fill the whole world. There is nothing that will be kept from you. No joy, no peace, no love, no grace, no mercy that will be denied you by the Father if you are willing to let your empire crumble at the coming of Jesus Christ into your life. Because let's bring it back to the dream, to the mystery. At the end of this story, God reveals the mystery to Nebuchadnezzar, and his heart is changed. He recognizes who God is and that Daniel has spoken from him. Because even though, right, because like I said at the beginning, we could debate all sorts of ways this prophecy can be interpreted in history. And Nebuchadnezzar had no idea what was coming. He was still filled with mysteries. And yet, when Jesus Christ, even in a symbolic form, enters into the picture, everything makes sense. That's right. Jesus Christ is the only way to make sense of the world. Amen. And the gospel is the only opportunity that we or anyone else has to walk through it, to get to the other side of this trajectory of destruction. So which kingdom are you operating in today? What is the trajectory of your life today? Based on how you've been acting, based on how you've been praying, based on what you've been doing and what you've been thinking and what you've been feeling? Do you find that your trajectory is never ending unto glory? Or do you feel like it's collapsing in on you? Because that's not Christ. But it could be your opportunity to come to him. Because Christ is where those two realities meet. Just as Jesus Christ came into the world as God from heaven into the earth by taking on flesh and dwelling with man, the light which dwelt with God, as we saw earlier in Daniel's prayer, the revelation of mysteries came and dwelt with man. Those who are walking in darkness have seen a great light, and that light is Christ. Amen. If you feel your life is not in the trajectory of glory, then this is Christ's invitation to change course, to come out on the other side. Because he doesn't meet us in glory. He meets us at the base, at the destruction, at the weakness of the clay and the iron in our lives, at the brittleness, at our most desperate moments. That's where Christ meets us. And that's where he changes our story completely. So if that's you, listen to the invitation. And since we're almost out of time, I'll give a slightly different challenge and tie it back in to Daniel. If that's not you, and you have Jesus, and you've built your life on that foundation, and when you look out into the future, you do see glory. If that's you, then who do you need to stand in the gap for? Who do you need to be Daniel for? Who in your life is hurtling on a trajectory of destruction? Who you need to stand at their most desperate hour and speak the revelation of God to them? And you may sit there and think, well, how could I do that? What could I say that could matter? No wise man revealed the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. No astrologer revealed it to Nebuchadnezzar. Just a humble man who prayed. You have not because you ask not. So ask. Hesitate no more. Every one of us in this room has people in their lives who are hurtling towards death. Don't let them keep going. Be Daniel. Be Jesus to those people.